This is Bernie Bear coming to you today from the Firehouse Kitchen. Did you know that cooking is the leading cause of fires? To prevent cooking fires, remember these 3 rules. Keep anything that can burn 3 feet away from the stove. Do not leave the kitchen when you are cooking. Stay and look when you cook. If you have a fire on your stove, cover the fire with the lid or a baking sheet. Then, turn the stove off and call 911. Remember that cooking is the leading cause of fires, so do your part to prevent fires in the kitchen. See you next time.
Emerald ash borer, or EAB for short, is an invasive pest that has created an environmental crisis in St. Paul for the past 2 decades. Since EAB was first discovered in St. Paul in 2009, our professional forestry staff have been executing a management plan that focuses on the removal and replacement of public ash trees. Our staff know as well as anyone the impact that losing trees has on individuals and neighborhoods across the city. But we have reached a critical phase in the infestation. Dead and declining infested ash trees quickly dry out and become brittle, are prone to failures such as dropping limbs, and pose an increasing public safety risk. By removing these trees from the landscape, we can then work to restore the urban forest by planting a more diverse combination of species where they once stood. The City of St. Paul has chosen not to embark on a long-term treatment program for public ash trees, but individual property owners can find more information on potential treatment options for individual trees on our website. It is important to understand, however, that the vast
Um, you were there, then you weren't, then you were there. I'm glad it ended up on their side, so that's
just trying to keep everybody on their toes.
that's good. We have Committee meeting to order. Welcome. Happy Wednesday, folks. We are closing in on the end of our budget season here at the council. And today we have our org committee meeting as opposed to our budget committee. We have 3 items on our agenda. We did have to postpone a census update, which will still be coming to us this year. And I know we're looking forward to hearing that update from Claire Verbaten and crew. But today we have rent stabilization on the agenda. We have an update from Kat Beltman around district councils and an effort to just have a more regular check-in on the work that she's doing and kind of a touch base with our district councils. And then Russ Stark is leading a conversation. Actually, I had the actual factual title right in front of me. No, I don't. But talking about getting youth outdoors, and I think particularly getting youths of color outdoors and the initiatives of the city in it. So that should be a wonderful way to wrap up our conversation today. As we get started, I know we have City Attorney Rachel Tierney in the house, and just for perspective from my council members, colleagues, we are just a reminder, and I'm sure Ms. Tierney will remind us that as well, that the referendum that is before the public is not something that the council will be voting on as a body, but only as individuals, and that as you know, due to regulations in the around this type of an initiative, we are not in a role of advocating for one position or the other. We have in the past week or two had some questions that have been surfacing on social media and in our inboxes, just asking for some clarification. So we asked the city attorney's office to drop in, share some factual updates with us. And so just appreciating the kind of the narrow path there, because we want to make sure that we are within the confines of the law, but also had some questions particularly pertaining to how the referendum in St. Paul is different than the referendum in Minneapolis. And then also there's been some confusion about whether or not the council has authority to change a referendum that has come to us in this manner once it is passed, or you know, in the chance it is passed. So I think we'll hear a bit from Ms. Tierney on that, and then move on to the next item on our agenda. So just setting a little context for that. I will, Ms. Maloney, is there anything I need to add to that before I hand things over to Ms. Tierney?
No, I believe you've covered it.
So we're off to a good start then. Great. Yep. Welcome, Ms. Tierney. It's nice to have you here today, and thank you for being here to answer the questions that we sent to you earlier this week.
Thank you, Council President Brenmoen. My pleasure to be here. I do have a colleague with me. Stephen Ernest is his name. He's a new attorney in our office, and he really dug into the differences between Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I'm going to let him take over and kind of explain that context to the council.
All right, thank you. And I think that this will be helpful because there's certainly, because there's so many conversations in Minneapolis and St. Paul, understanding the differences in the two initiatives will be very helpful for the community and for council members. Thank you. And welcome, Mr. Ernst.
Hey, good morning, Council President, council members. My name is Stephen Ernest, and I'm speaking on behalf of the City Attorney's Office. There are if you'll entertain me, I think there are kind of 2 points before answering the question about kind of how the rent stabilization ordinance is, how we got to this place. Kind of the first clarifying point, I think, is there is a difference between an initiative and a referendum. How it got here is this is so the power of initiative is the power to have a voters to petition to have an ordinance placed on the ballot. A referendum is kind of the opposite. It's kind of the voters are acting to repeal an act of council after council has already acted. So I just kind of wanted to make that clarifying point. This is the ordinance in this case has been brought through the power of initiative. I make that distinction because the Minneapolis City Charter does not give its voters the power of initiative, but the St. Paul City Charter does. And that's just kind of an important distinction just at the outset. The second point, and I know it's not the most scintillating topic, but it's about municipal legislative power. And I think it's kind of important just to review it so I can set up as to why the rent stabilization ordinance came from the voters as opposed to city council. So in Minnesota, there are two kinds of cities. There are statutory cities, and then there are home rule charter cities. The city of St. Paul is a home rule charter city. So we have as our the document that grants and defines the powers of our city government. It's called a charter. It's kind of like a constitution. Statutory cities, they're governed by a uniform statutory code that's in the Minnesota statutes. In contrast, charters can be different. They can differ from city to city, which is why the Charter of St. Paul is different from the Charter of Minneapolis. As a general rule, home rule charter cities, with respect to local matters, they have all of the power that the state legislature possesses with respect to statewide matters, except where the state legislature has expressly said, no, you cannot legislate in this area. So the default rule is home rule charter cities have very broad powers, except when they've been preempted by the state. So in this case, the city of St. Paul, because it's a home rule charter city, it very likely has the power to adopt a rent stabilization ordinance pursuant to its police powers, but it can't because the state has expressly said in section 471.9996 that no city can adopt a rent stabilization or a rent control ordinance, any kind of ordinance that regulates private rents. So prior to the enactment of that law, the city could have done rent stabilization, but now it can't. That's a general rule. Now, there are two exceptions to that rule. The first exception is that city council can propose an ordinance or a charter amendment that gives the city council to adopt a rent stabilization or rent control ordinance. But it's not the rent stabilization ordinance itself. It's just the charter amendment giving them the authority to adopt it at a later date. But that amendment or ordinance has to first be approved by the voters. And then once they approve it, then the city council can adopt the rent stabilization ordinance if they choose to. The second exception is that voters themselves can petition to have the ordinance placed on the ballot, as long as the city charter gives the voters that power. And then once they petition to have it on the ballot, then as long as it's approved, it becomes law. So there's only one step required to meet that second exception, but for the first exception, it's a two-step process. So that's a long-winded way of getting to the actual point, which is that in the case of St. Paul, because our city charter under section 8.04 of the charter, because we give our voters the power of initiative, they have petitioned to have the rent stabilization ordinance put on the ballot, sort of bypassing council. And once it's approved, it'll become it's a lawfully enacted rent stabilization ordinance, notwithstanding the general prohibition. But in the case of Minneapolis, because their charter does not provide their voters with the power of initiative, City Council has instead proposed a charter amendment to give City Council that power so then they can enact a rent stabilization ordinance in the future. I do believe that the city of Minneapolis did consider giving their voters the power of initiative just with respect to the rent stabilization issue, but their charter commission and their city attorney's office, they counseled against that. So they've just pursued the first exception. So hopefully that answers your question. Any further questions, I'd be happy to answer.
It's definitely complex, so I appreciate. I feel like it was a clear explanation, but I can definitely understand the complexities there, especially recognizing we have different cities. It sounds like St. Paul could have done the other route, and Minneapolis had a way to kind of do the version in St. Paul, but opted not to do that. So that's helpful. Are there any other specific questions just about the distinction between what's happening in Minneapolis and St. Paul? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Council President. Council members.
Ms. Prince. Ms. Prince, you're muted.
Can we ask the question about whether or not we are able to amend the ordinance? Is that coming up as part of this presentation?
I hope so, because I think that's one of the questions that has been that we asked the city attorney's office, and also that has been I think circulating and confusing people. So I think that would be good to understand what are the limits given this initiative that we have in front of us in St. Paul.
Great, thanks.
Council President Bremo, would you like me to just jump to that question?
Yep. Yes, please.
Okay. So the under in 804 of our charter, it says that the ordinance cannot be repealed within 1 year of its approval by the voters. So the ordinance can't be repealed. The question then is one that does not have a clear answer for us in law. Obviously, we can't repeal it, but that doesn't speak to whether we can amend it. I can tell you that there is a very skinny amount of case law that helps us figure out what we're able to do. And so I can really only speak generally and say that we likely have the ability to amend the ordinance or supplement the ordinance. But the more substantive any changes to the ordinance will be, or the more substantive changes we make, the more likely we are to have a risk of litigation, and the more likely a court is to overturn that action. So our plan in the city attorney's office, we will review any proposed changes and look at them for how they are, whether or not they are substantive, to what extent they are substantive, and with the goal being looking at it with a lens of making sure that we haven't altered the will of the voters. And that's kind of the lens that we will look through.
Thank you. And I know in any ordinance that we're passing, if we have a substantive change, we have to lay the item over, it requires further action. If we have to replace an instead of an A, that is not a substantive change. It's more of a technical change, not a technical change. What is that? A non-substantive change. Correcting some sort of a typographical error, or just making sure that there's clarification around a particular word. Okay, so that's helpful. I realize that you said it's general, but I think it is helpful. Ms. Naker.
Thanks, Council President. And Ms. Tierney, completely understanding your point that there isn't much case law here and that you'd have to evaluate each change as it came forward. I guess I do think it's really important to be clear about this, since there has been, I've heard questions from residents. I've heard, the mayor talk about making changes quickly as to what really can be changed. And I guess I'm just wondering, leaving aside switching A's to these and ands to ifs, any change since the ordinance is coming to us fully formed, any substantive change, seems like it could be argued to be altering the will of the voters, right? Because the voters are voting on exact language. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how your office would evaluate any changes that were more than just A's to ands or ands to ifs, to know whether or not it was altering the will of the voters. And then if you have any specific case law that you can point to that shows cities either being successful or not in litigation on this.
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, boy, do I wish there was specific case law that I could point to that would give us some guidance. It simply isn't out there. What I can say is that obviously, in order to give this ordinance meaning, we're going to have to do a significant amount of work creating an infrastructure for the ordinance. When you ask your question, you use the word change. I don't think if we were to characterize something as a change, that would probably be something that would have an increased risk of litigation. We'll take a look at everything and try to look at what other courts in other states have done. We will look at what other rent stabilization ordinances do, ones that are similar to ours, what they look like. And we'll just have to engage in some kind of a comparative process and a risk analysis. And I wish I had better, stronger, clearer answers. But we're in a bit of a unique circumstance here. And so it is going to be a matter of kind of rolling up our sleeves and reading some tea leaves to some extent.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. Mr. Tolbert.
Ms. Tierney, could you talk a little bit about the rulemaking process and kind of that, not necessarily the specifics of what it will include, but what the city will be necessitated to do if this passes the voters in terms of rulemaking and implementation?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tolbert, I'm not the best person to answer these questions. I know that OFE and Munir have been working on what we think this ordinance will look like. I also know that they're at the very, very beginning of that process, looking to other jurisdictions. We'll need to create a board. You know, if we're, you know, you use the term rulemaking. Rulemaking in St. Paul is something that we don't have a clear process. The city attorney's office, we have some recommendations for how departments should do rulemaking. But one important thing about rulemaking is rules are under subservient to, for lack of the right term, the ordinance itself. So the rules can provide some breadth, but they can't be in conflict with the ordinance at all. That's what a rule means. But with regard to what the actual process will look like, I can't say. You know, that's a much better question for Munir. He has more information about what other jurisdictions have done. And I know that he and the Office of Finance are working on how many staff would need to be hired in those kinds of issues.
Did you have a follow-up, Mr. Tolbert? Okay. And I think that's like we did. One of the questions we asked was just to get an idea of a budget or, you know, just some sort of idea of where would this be housed and what is the staffing behind it. And the answer to your point is, was it that administration doesn't know the answer to those questions at this time, but they're working on it and will get back to us in the next week or two. So I know that was one of the questions that has come up and we didn't have an answer for, and we still don't. But I know that the administration is working on that piece. So I think there was just one other question. I'm blanking right now. Oh, about President. Yeah, about the effective dates and what is the effective dates and how that relates to the 1-year amendment piece.
Yeah, Council President Brenmo and council members, I feel like I'm coming here with a lot of non-answers, but under our charter, an ordinance takes effect immediately after it is adopted. The effective date on this ordinance is, I believe, May 1st of 2022. I think that it is likely that a court would find this ordinance took effect immediately. As a practical matter, we won't have the infrastructure to meaningfully enforce the ordinance, but there is a private right of action in this ordinance, and a court may interpret that that private right of action takes effect immediately. Again, we don't have any case law to guide us in this area. We only have what our charter says.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Ms. Tierney today? Hopefully this is helpful. I know that we've had questions come into us that it's been hard to answer. And obviously in our role as council members, we're doing our best to answer people in a factual, unbiased way. Although I know that as individuals, we have our, you know, many of us have taken a position, but it is an interesting place to straddle. And so I appreciate the factual information you're sharing with us here today, and I hope it's shed some clarity on things that have been a bit confusing for us as we go to the final days of this initiative phase or process. So thank you for that. Are there other questions before we move on to our next topic? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Tierney. I know this was a quick turnaround, and we appreciate your report here today, as well as Mr. Ernest. So Mr. Tolbert has a question.
This is not necessarily, this isn't for Ms. Tierney, but more just conversation. Just to clarify, I know we did ask, and we have been asking for the budget, and you mentioned this, Council President, but the budget and what the administration of this ordinance would be if passed by the voters, and the administration does not have those numbers yet. or has not shared them yet. That's correct, right? See, everyone's understanding. Yeah. So, wish we had that information. We've asked for it for quite a while now, but we don't have it yet.
Agreed. I think it would be helpful to have that information. All right. So it looks like there are no further questions. So thank you again, Mr. Ernest and Ms. Tierney, and we will move on to our update from Kat Beltman and the District Council work.
Good morning. I am just getting my technology transferred over. I'm participating in the anti-racism workshop the next 3 days, so I was listening in on that while you guys had that last section. So just getting my technology going, and I'm going to share my screen just to do a quick presentation. Okay, so I wanted to come back. So last time I was in front of all of you was in June, and wanted to come back and just do a kind of end of year check-in. And I think as I'm starting to think about next year and kind of what my priorities are and focusing on, it felt like a good time again to check in with all of you and get any feedback that you might have, provide some just general updates on kind of the state of the district councils at this point. So if my thing will work here. So a couple of things that I've been focused on kind of since we last met, really kind of the big thing is launching some new training opportunities for district councils. So that has been one of the things that the councils have communicated as a priority, that they would like to see kind of a more robust opportunities for both staff and board members. So to help to meet that need, I've put together a training calendar kind of consisting of trainings that are offered by outside organizations. In June, we offered a reimbursement request training to try to help. We've had a lot of turnover in the district councils in the last couple of months. So it felt very timely to put this out there in the hopes that we can get people trained in and processing those smoothly. A board member 101 training. I offered 2 of those in September, had great turnout. I think we had about 30 participants total across the 2 trainings from across the district council system. It was very well received, and so I've added a couple more trainings in November, and then I'm looking towards next year offering those trainings on a kind of either quarterly basis or a bi-monthly basis. Also, kind of to be responsive to some of the requests that I've heard from both district council staff and board members, putting together kind of probably bi-monthly board member. I need to come up with some of these terms are not the greatest, but board member happy hours. Looking to both provide space for district council board members to come together to get to know each other and share best practices with each other, but also provide a space where we can do a little bit of training and learning on different topics that intersect or kind of cross council boundaries. So the gathering that we had in October was focused on the city has an equity toolkit that felt like it's something that could be edited or revised and used as a tool for the district councils. And I know a lot of district councils are looking at equity issues right now. So we offered that in October, hoping to see attendance and things increase in that as we move forward. But it was great to get that kicked off. And then later today, and I should say when I'm putting all of this under training, but I'm using that very, very broadly. So later this afternoon, then we're also offering an opportunity for the district councils to learn about the city's potential legislative priorities heading into next year and providing them a space to weigh in on those. And then also receiving some updates on the class and license process, some process updates. As I mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of transition at the district councils. I think we have 3 new executive directors and 1 executive director who has been in the role for a little while, but kind of still counting in that pool. So I would say a lot of time spent really supporting the boards in those transition efforts. So a lot of questions around hiring, best practices, wanting to understand how other councils manage hiring, questions around salary, things like that. And then really kind of working with the new executive directors that have come on their onboarding. So making sure that they're understanding city requirements, the contracts, kind of what we need, getting them the resources that are necessary. And we have, I know, one more transition coming up at the Fort Road Federation. They should have a new executive director in the next couple months, I believe. And then hopefully we'll kind of level off into a state of relative, I don't know, the opposite of transition, consistency across the councils.
Ms. Beltman,
yeah.
before you go on, Ms. Naker has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Ms. Beltman, thanks so much. I love the idea of getting district council input on our legislative priorities. I think our district councils are often so much closer to the problems than we are and have really good ideas for solutions, both at the state level and the city level. So I'm really glad you're doing that. I'm just curious, are you also engaging them on our budget and getting their input on specific investments they'd like to see or savings they'd like to see? And how does that information come back to us?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Naker, that is a great question. They have received all the communication about the budget and that there are opportunities to weigh in. We have not, or I have not specifically sat down and asked them to weigh in on that. That is absolutely, though, something that I could do and could schedule a session for them to be able to provide that input. So I'm happy to work on that in the next couple of weeks for sure. I think that they would appreciate that.
That'd be great. Thanks. And then, yeah, it's both on the legislative priorities and on the budget. It would be great to for you to just share whatever you're hearing from them, so we can adjust accordingly.
Absolutely, absolutely. The other thing, kind of outside of, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my job description later, but one of the last parts of my job description is assist with kind of other community outreach efforts as assigned. And that's really come in, I would say, over the last several months, kind of supporting some broader council research projects. So I've been working closely with Marcia on the Reparations Legislative Advisory Committee, kind of wearing both a tech support hat and getting everybody trained in on how to use Teams and making sure that we have our technology set up, but also working on the website and some other committee support activities. I've been working closely with Nia on both the audit committee and the business awards. So looking at kind of helping to draft some of the documents that are needed, doing some outreach for the business awards. You all are going to be hearing from me much more frequently over the next few weeks as we work to solicit nominations for the business awards. So kind of getting involved in some additional projects on the council side. Real quick, in addition to kind of that work, end of year priorities, again, kind of continuing to offer those training opportunities. I'm hoping to get time with department directors or kind of key staff in departments that the councils interact with a lot, both to hear so that the councils have an opportunity to hear what those departments are prioritizing as they move into 2022, in the hopes that as the councils are putting together, district councils are putting together their work plans, those priorities could help to inform their work. So really, I think one of my goals in this role is really continuing to open up those communication channels and kind of make sure that we have good communication flow moving from the city to district councils and vice versa. 2022 contract improvements. So this is something that has been in the works for a while, and I think that we're kind of moving closely to making some, I would call it kind of a phase one of some improvements to the contract, looking at providing better clarity on what's allowable and prohibited activities, providing some better definitions around those things. Specifically, I know that there have been some questions related to lobbying activities of district councils. And I think wanting to provide some language around what actually is lobbying versus activism versus engagement to help us as we move through that. I think one of the things, just to kind of quickly touch on that, because I know there have been some questions about it, one of the steps that we've put in recently as we get questions about district council activities, especially as it relates to the ballot amendment or ballot initiative, excuse me, is if we get questions from community members related to, we've seen district councils putting out X, Y, or Z information, it feels like it's crossing a line of lobbying. is notifying the district councils that we received that question or that communication or concern, reminding them about what's allowable and prohibited, and that lobbying is not an acceptable use of city dollars. And then with the two community kind of questions that I've received, have then received information back from the district councils verifying that they are not using city dollars to fund those activities. It just, again, kind of briefly, the IRS allows for district or for nonprofits, 501c3s are allowed to participate in some lobbying and activist activities. There are some limits that they place on that. The city contract specifically prohibits lobbying activity. And so I think we're, really wanting to walk that balance of, again, ensuring that district councils aren't using city dollars to fund those activities, but also recognizing that they are independent organizations that have other sources of funding that they could be using to pay for different activities. But so
Ms.
doing
Feldman,
some work, yeah.
That I do think that it would be worth, and maybe we can put that on our list for next year to dig into a bit. But I find it very, I don't know. I find it very complicated, and I even just like how you just explained that to us. It's like if the district council pays for its rent and its internet access and its staff with city dollars, but then uses $1,000 from another source to pay for lobbying efforts, they're still using city dollars to keep the lights on and to pay for staff and to provide internet service. So I feel like it's an interesting and kind of gray area. And so I really think it would be helpful to understand where that line is. I know that there's some district councils that have started separate organizations, and I don't understand the funding streams there either. But I think it would be helpful because it is complicated. District councils all kind of take their role, do their roles differently, but I think that this is where there's a very clear legal line. I know that we're working hard as council members to navigate that as well. But as I realize you're not an attorney, maybe you're an attorney. But as I said that, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't assume. But I really do think it would be helpful to get clarification on that. And I appreciate that we are taking some steps to hem that in some ways, because it is complex. And I know when you're representing a community, especially a community that may have different opinions on a matter, I think it's inappropriate to take an advocacy role in that neighborhood council. But on the other hand, they are trying to organize and activate community. So understanding where that line is would be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Council President Brenmoen. I mean, if watching Law and Order for years qualifies me as an attorney, then I kind of am.
Well, me too.
But yeah, and I think I've been working closely with PED and with the city attorney's office on these questions around. We've been kind of having some active conversations over the last year around this, and really creating some clarity around what's allowed and not, and then also again kind of looking to the contracts to provide some much better language clarification on what activities and those definitions, again, specifically what is lobbying, what's not. But I think that it is a question that will likely continue to come up, and there is a kind of messy gray area, but I think one that we can move towards creating some better clarity and expectations around, for sure.
Okay. And Ms. Naker looks like you have a follow-up or something along this tack we're on.
Something witty and smart to say. Yeah, exactly. No, it's funny that Ms. Beltman that you quoted Law and Order, because I'm rewatching The West Wing, and I was reminded of the quote by President Bartlett that I'm not just the president of the people who agree with me, I'm the president of the United States. And I think that came to mind because I think there's also there's the legal aspect as to what is allowed and what's prohibited, but there's also sort of the public perception and community engagement function of district councils, and I do think about that a little bit in terms of even if a district council is keeping within the legal limit as to 30% of its expenditures, for example, on advocacy, I'd be interested in looking at how that has been perceived by the community. For example, people who live in the neighborhood are represented by the district council, but don't happen to agree with that particular advocacy position. Are they then less likely to be engaged to run for the board, to, come to the district council for help when they need it, to feel like their project is going to get approved if they happen to not, things like that. I think it would be, this is just part of the larger theme, I think, of making sure that district councils are truly representative of the neighborhoods they serve and are also, inclusive and speaking for everybody that they represent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Council President Brenmo and Council Member Naker. I think you're right. I and again, I think that it's a really, it's a tough place. It's a conversation that needs to happen, and it's one that we really need to work on clarifying. I think, there's a inherent challenge that these are separate entities, nonprofit entities, and so we contract them for certain services, and how much do we then, as part of that contract, limit the other activities that they're allowed to participate in, potentially hampering other sources of funding and things of that nature, which again kind of gets complex. It's not, as a funder, that's something that I think that we are able to do, but I think something that is definitely worth considering. And to your point, there is the flip side of it, where we are contracting with them to provide community engagement services. And if they are performing some lobbying or activist activities, how does that hamper their ability to fulfill the contracted services that the city is requesting? So it's definitely, for me, as somebody who's kind of really likes the theory of nonprofits and the kind of the that side of things, I think it's a really interesting exercise, but it's also one I think that's very important that we work through and move towards providing that that clarity and around expectations and kind of what is and isn't allowed. I think we need to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, I think that we're looking at making some general improvements as we head into 2022. And then I think that there is just kind of based on conversations both internally at the city and then externally with district councils, I have a feeling that there will be a kind of another phase of this work in 2022 as we just continue to work to improve the contracting process. Other couple of priorities that I'm working on, again, I mentioned my so updating my job description, or just maybe kind of providing some better clarity around it. And then drafting my work plan. And then we'll continue providing support to those council projects that I mentioned previously, and as other needs come up, providing that assistance as well. So I went through this when we met in June. There hasn't been too much that has changed in terms of this green, yellow, red. So as you all might remember, a couple of years ago, these were the priorities that you all, in addition to the district councils, came up with in terms of things that you wanted to see kind of on a system level, priorities that we wanted to work on. Most of the stuff, I will say, has been completed, or there's things like, leveraging outside resources to support district councils. That's kind of an ongoing thing that I'm always keeping an eye out for funding opportunities for the district councils. But most of this has been done. Given both that this green, yellow, red, we're kind of at the end of this phase of the work, but also that with the turnover from the councils, they are all in a process in kind of a evaluation stage right now. So since July, they've been having conversations internally together about what they would like to prioritize, how they'd like to continue collaborating and partnering together as they head into the future. And then we've been in conversation as well about what that might look like in terms of what priorities or needs they have for me in my role and what things they might want to see from the city. So I would anticipate that sometime early next year, we might be looking to have a conversation with council to kind of talk about what comes next now that we're kind of wrapping up this initial phase with the green, yellow, red. Two last slides. I think, again, in an effort kind of heading into next year and with Trudy's transition, it felt like there was a good opportunity to take a look at my position description and just see if it still makes sense and see if there are places where we need to provide some more clarity. I think I have a very broad, kind of vague job description, and there is space, I think, to provide some better clarity on kind of some of the specifics of what I do. And I think that then will help to inform my work plan both next year, but then kind of moving forward, the expectations of me and my role. So I have the 2019 position description that was listed with the job posting. Again, really focused on being that liaison between the city and the councils and building capacity. As I'm looking towards 2022, some of the things that I am prioritizing are continuing to build and expand the training opportunities that we have. Again, that's, I think, a big opportunity or a big need for the district councils and a want on their end, and also something that it's really fun to provide those trainings. So both looking at what I can provide, but also what we can provide from outside organizations that have the expertise in specific areas. Continue to meet regularly with district council boards and staff to support whatever capacity building that might be. I feel like that's kind of like a given with my position. Partnership with PED, I think if I haven't mentioned this before, Kurt Schultz in PED is the contract administrator. He and I have worked very closely together and I think have formed a really good partnership that helps both on the administration side of the contracts for him, but then also allows me to kind of intersect and provide that capacity building support to the district councils. So continuing that partnership. Website administration, I think I don't know when the last time that some of the language and things around district councils was updated, but that's one thing that I'd like to see done as we move into next year or in next year. Again, looking at kind of what's the next phase of the work with the green, yellow, red kind of being completed. And then council research projects kind of as assigned, continuing to provide that work, especially as projects where there's a community engagement component. I think both because of my role with district councils, that makes sense for me to chip in on those projects, but also just given my background in community engagement and kind of civic engagement, lending that expertise or background that I have to help assist with council projects as well. So that's what I have. And I think just kind of ending with wanting to know from all of you kind of what you would like to see done differently, improved upon, or added in 2022 as I think about the work, and any other questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you, Cap, for this update. And just to remind my colleagues that this will be a regular update. I think one of the things that we talked about in a one-on-one this mid-COVID was just wanting to have a more regular check-in. The work that you're doing with our district councils really touches all of us. But in a lot of ways, the work that you're doing is very, I don't want to use the word insular, but you're sort of, it's that you have an interesting peer group. Is it district council leadership? Is it the council members, council staff? And I think that the way to bridge that is to just be really intentional and regular about our contacts and updates with you and provide these opportunities for our feedback and also get an update on what you're hearing from the district councils. I know Ms. Ninker said this earlier, but I really love, I love what I heard you saying about board member training, board member happy hours, recognizing that when we have transitions, the best way to learn kind of a challenging, complex job is to learn from folks who are in the field doing the work right now. You can't read it in a book. And so working together, especially in COVID, when it's just, we really need that human interaction. I think that that's great leadership. And so I really do. I appreciate hearing that. And then also when you were mentioning the legislative, providing space for the feedback on the legislative agenda, I think that is great. And recognizing that the district councils are up close and personal with a lot of those projects in a way that even as council members, there's 17 district councils and 7 of us. So there's more district councils and it's more chopped up, especially on the western side of the city. I know the district councils get bigger as you head east. So I really do appreciate that leadership and I look forward to hearing more about that. I see Councilmember Yang has a hand up.
Thank you. My first question is in the slide where you had priorities marked with high, what was it, green, red, yellow. I didn't see a key, so can you explain what the colors translate into? And then I was wondering if you can also share whether you see maybe like a common theme and support that district councils need or any sort of barriers they might be experiencing in their work.
Yeah, thank you, Council President Brenmont and Councilmember Yang. I think So the green, yellow, red, and if it's helpful, I'm happy to pop it back up on the screen if you would like. It's green is just mean go and do that work. So those were kind of the items that were identified as easier or low hanging fruit. And some of those things were, again, looking at streamlining the contract process, looking into health insurance opportunities for district councils. Yellow was kind of hold or wait until some of the green items were completed. And then red was wait on that until the other priorities have been accomplished. And then we can revisit those items. I should have provided a key on that. So thank you for asking that. In terms of kind of common levels of support, I think I would say a couple of things. I would say from district councils kind of across the board, and this probably comes as no surprise, and I think that many nonprofit organizations are struggling with this as well, or this is kind of a common theme, I should say. Access to resources, financial resources is kind of the biggest thing that I hear. I think there's always a need and desire to have. They're continually asked to do more, but with the same funding. So I think that's something that I hear kind of across the board, and I'm sure you all have heard as well. There are other things. Interpretive services is something that comes up a lot. It's not something that we can necessarily provide through the city, but I think with the work that they're doing in terms of outreach and engagement to the community and recognizing that not all of our community members speak English as their first language, being able to provide those, whether it's flyers or at meetings, having access to that. So I think that's something we need to try to troubleshoot for. Those are kind of the big things that come to mind. In terms of what I'm asked for and commonalities, I mean, I think it's really across the board, and it depends on kind of the stage of where the district council is at. Again, as some of the district councils were going through these staffing changes, I've been working really closely with board members on both the kind of pre-hiring process, and so looking at salaries or best practices around hiring, what's required. And then it's really the onboarding piece when the new executive director starts. For some of the more established district councils or district councils who haven't experienced some of the turnover, it's things of, I had one council ask, they're thinking about entering a fiscal sponsorship relationship with an organization and to support the work that they were doing. So it was doing the research on that. And is that allowed? What does that look like? Can you provide a presentation to our board? And so I get a lot of questions like that our board's considering this or we're thinking about it. Can you do some research for me on what best practices might be? I always kind of joke with them, and I think others, that I feel like part of my role is there's the actual capacity building, doing the trainings, and then there's like part therapist, part like just ear that I can just listen to what's going on. So I think there's kind of a mix of those types of things that come in.
Great. Are there other questions for Ms. Beltman this morning? Does not appear to be. So we will thank you for your work. I will just say, looking forward to being back in the office and having more day-to-day interaction with you as well, Ms. Beltman, and I appreciate that you're keeping that rolling with the district councils. I want to go to one of those happy hours. Sounds fun.
Wonderful.
Thanks for your report, and we look forward to hearing back from you again soon. We'll get you on the schedule.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. All right, so we are coming up on the last item on our agenda. It's Explore Outdoors. I know Russ Stark is in the house leading off this conversation. Welcome, Mr. Stark. It's Chief Stark. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Council President Brenmo and council members. Good to see you all virtually. And I'd like to start just with a quick round of introductions of the team that is doing this work and that is going to be presenting today. So Russ Stark, Chief Resilience Officer in the Mayor's Office, working on climate and sustainability broadly across the city. Glad to be with you. And for quick introductions, let me pass it over first to Asha Schaffner.
Thanks, Russ. Asha Schaffner, pronouns she, her, hers, St. Paul Parks, doing our environmental and outdoor education. I'll kick it to Mary.
Hello, Council President, Council members. My name is Mary Hanke-Haney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the education coordinator within our natural resources team in Parks and Rec. Going over to Joseph.
Good morning. My name is Joseph. I work in youth services here at the Downtown Library in St. Paul, and I support our Nature Smart work. So happy to see you all.
Thank you all. It's a small but mighty team of folks who are doing the work under this umbrella that we are calling Explore Outdoors St. Paul, which is a term that's been used before, but it's sort of a newer term that we're using as an umbrella for the city's work connecting kids and families in particular to the outdoors and nature, and really building on those opportunities. This is a body of work that the city has really been engaged in for a number of years, depending on kind of where you kind of date back its origins, at least to 2014 or so. Some of that has been supported through like grant relationship with folks like the city's Connecting Children to Nature Network, which is a program of the National League of Cities that we've been one of the founding members of over this many years now. And the city of St. Paul, you all may not know, is sort of renowned in this area nationally. I think a lot of this work has been relatively under the radar, and that's a big part of why we're here today, is just to tell you more about the work that's been going on over these last several years, kind of the latest and greatest of new innovations and approaches in recent years, and then to engage you in conversation about what might be next in this work. One of the reasons that the city of St. Paul is known nationally in this space is the concept of a Nature Smart library. The Sunray Library over in Ward 7 was actually the first Nature Smart library that we're aware of anywhere in the country. And it was the first in St. Paul, and that concept has kind of taken off from there. And for those of you less familiar, there's an outdoor garden space over there, as well as some indoor displays. And it was the first library where we had some significant programming around connecting kids and families to the outdoors in spaces like literally right outside of buildings, in some cases even in buildings where things were brought inside. Over those years, other cities have kind of replicated that program, and we've replicated programs that other cities have initiated in this general area. I think during COVID, we've all experienced maybe more deeply than in the past the value of getting outside for health, mental health, connection. We know from past research and work and just anecdotes that not all of our kids and families have had the same level of access to those opportunities. And so this work is really about making sure that all families and kids in St. Paul have more opportunities to experience the outdoors, to learn some things about the natural world, and to find those spaces where they can really enjoy themselves, find some peace, and hopefully some well-being. And so with that overview, we are going to be getting to you shortly, and you'll see on your screen here the cover page of this new impact report that we've developed with some help from the partners that I mentioned. We went old school and have actually printed some hard copies of these, so we'll be getting those over to you shortly for you to review. With that, I will hand it over to the folks really doing this work day to day. I'm just sort of a figurehead. And we'll start with Mary Hanke-Haney from Parks. Mary?
Oh, Mary, it looks like you're muted.
Yeah.
Happens
Sorry
to the
about
best
that.
of us.
It's, you know, you're thinking about all the things you want to make sure you don't do. Thanks again for the time. As Russ said, this work has been going on here in St. Paul for an extended amount of time. You're all aware that we have a great park system that didn't happen in the last couple of years. That's been ongoing for a very long time. But the real kind of concerted effort around connecting children and families to nature started with the Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative, which is a joint initiative of the National League of Cities Institute for Youth Education and Families and the Children in Nature Network. And it came from, there's a large and growing body of evidence that says connecting children and families to nature is really good for individual health, physical and mental health, as well as, the obvious subsequent impacts on our communities. So the CCCN initiative is all about more equitable and abundant access to nature for everybody in our cities. So we were one of the founding cities, one of 7 that started in 2015, looking at systems level changes that we can make. We believe that cities can be kind of the driver of making these changes, is making sure that we do across our entire nation, and especially in our community, have equitable and abundant access to nature and all of the benefits that we know it causes. So here in St. Paul, we've been working on a variety of different programs at different levels to make sure that we can hit a bunch of different things. So we'll just kind of go through some overviews on that. One of the more recent things that we've been working on is working with the Sprockets Network to access youth serving staff across the entire city, whether they work for the city in Parks and Rec or in libraries, or whether they're, the YMCA or a childcare center, whatever it is, working with them to make sure that staff that are working with youth in our city across all demographics feel comfortable and understand what are the benefits of getting their kids outside, and how can they do that? What are the skills and the experiences that they need to feel comfortable doing that? So we've been doing trainings for youth serving staff. As Russ mentioned, and Joseph's going to talk a little bit more, we were the first Nature Smart library in the state, and Nature Smart is now I'll just pass it to Joseph, can talk more about it.
Great, thank you, Mary. As Mary mentioned, the goal of connecting children and nature is to promote equitable access to outdoor learning for young people. And that's great because it aligns with our strategic mission here in the city, through interagency coordination, supporting our parks, promoting health and wellness. And so the work I'm going to be talking about at the library has many leaders and champions, including Maureen Hartman, Riga Stalock. I came into this group in 2019, and as Mary talked about, I supported organizing outdoor education trainings for youth serving staff. Most recently, we had a few outdoor storytime trainings this summer, which were really well received. So in libraries, Nature Smart, the goal of Nature Smart in St. Paul Public Library is to provide equitable access to outdoor learning through programs, materials, and green space. So this, in 2013, the Sunray Library was remodeled to include an outdoor reading garden, including beehives and a pollinated prairie. And this sparked innovation and hands-on learning opportunities for children, youth, and families, prioritizing connecting families that are underserved through traditional environmental education programs. So the pillars to Nature Smart libraries include access to green space, materials, and programming. And so the materials that we provide are adventure backpacks. These are backpacks that are available for checkout, circulating backpacks that have books and activities on selected themes like monarchs, trees, and birds. These libraries, again, also have an outdoor space where we can tie programming and put those nature-themed backpacks to good use. To COVID-19, we transitioned basically all of our programs outside in the summer of 2021. And so we had things like children's specialists leading programming on diverse themes like butterflies, and pollination, to feelings, inviting our families to learn outside. The last way that libraries try to connect our communities with the outdoors is through our Story Stroll program. And the Story Stroll program features oversized picture books that are displays in city and regional parks for families to walk through and read. So originally designed as an effort to provide safe and socially distanced learning, we partnered with Parks and Rec, St. Paul Public Schools to produce oversized picture books on popular picture books featuring diverse characters outside and we install these in different parks. And so last summer we worked with 4 rec centers, and we expanded that program this year. We delivered, I think, close to 1,500 hours of outdoor story stroll displays at rec centers, and we partnered with John A. Johnson, the school, and we also did events like the Lower Phelan Creek Pollinator Festival, and worked with Asha's BIPOC Family Nature Club. So those are just a few of the things that we do here in the libraries to connect families with the outdoors.
The part of being a part of a national initiative is let's working towards system level changes, looking how can we do things in our city that can be replicable across the nation so that we can be a leader. One of those is Nature Smart Libraries, which have now popped up in cities across the nation. And one of the partners that we were looking at that we could work with nationally was the YMCA. So in 2017, we started a partnership with the YMCA to get kids connected to nearby nature. YMCA camps in Minnesota are something that people from around the country come to because they recognize the great benefit that children can have from participating in them. But we're looking at, we don't need to send kids up to the boundary waters to have those experiences. We can make sure that kids living right here in our city can have those same experiences here in the city and get those benefits. So mobile camps started with a pilot at Hidden Falls in 2017, working with local organizations, surveying demographics that might not have access to traditionally, the full cost of a YMCA summer camp. So working with partner organizations like, our local YMCAs, Midway YMCA or Eastside YMCA, as well as Common Bond Communities, which is the Midwest's largest provider of affordable housing with services. So working with those youth, working with Hallie Q. Brown Center to say, hey, you have youth in your programs. Would they like to participate in these day camps? So we expanded it from Hidden Falls to both Hidden Falls and Phelan. And we've been on hold in 2020 and 2021, but looking to bring those back and get kids from our communities into our own parks here, Phelan and Hidden Falls, and getting them connected to nearby nature, and then getting their families involved too. So in 2019, we added a family day at the end, recognizing that it's not just about connecting with children, it's also making sure that their families can come out to the park and the youth have an opportunity to share with their families what they learned and what they did, and hopefully come back to the park in the future in their own free time.
Okay. I'm gonna jump back a little bit to trainings. We can leave this slide up. But I just wanted to mention, so we got some money from Met Council this past year to start doing trainings and certifications for BIPOC adults in our communities to get trained in on stuff like wilderness first aid, Minnesota Master Naturalist, canoeing certifications, etc. Because so often when we look at camps and outdoor programming in general, the staff more than likely do not reflect the same diversity as the young people that we're serving. And that's not just in St. Paul, that's statewide, region-wide. And so we're trying to change that. So there is a concerted effort on really intentionally training BIPOC folks so that they or we can be in community with our young people as well. We also got some money in that from Met Council for a gear van, which will allow us to bring outdoor programs to our people in different ways than we have been able to in the past. So for urban family camping, the way that we've done this in the past is we've partnered with Wilderness Inquiry. We've done like an indoor camp at Jimmy Lee in like mid-February or end of February. And then, and we'd get about between probably 75 and 90 participants. So maybe like 25 families. St. Paul families were always prioritized, as were especially families who have never camped before. So we'd get a bunch of families, they'd come together, we'd, set up tents in the gym, we'd have a movie going, we would, swim and stuff in the pool. And then the next morning, after everybody had slept, next morning we'd have breakfast together, and folks would sign up for one of 3 outdoor overnight camping trips that coming up summer. So again, kind of to my original point about how so often the staff don't look like the participants. This year, we've done a lot of BIPOC specific programming that's been led by BIPOC people. And so, I don't know, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, we did a pilot camping program with adults. And so the goal was to have BIPOC adults who had never camped before and BIPOC adults who considered themselves experienced campers to kind of mentor the new campers. And so we had like 12 or 13 people, and it was really beautiful. It was just like, your heart just feels so full when you get such a range of folks coming in and trying new things and learning together and sharing different ways of doing things, whether it's, cooking on a stove that's, the size of a Bic lighter, or, the dude who was talking about, he grew up on the reservation and they cooked over a wood stove. And so just like, we did that as a pilot so that to see, how does this work to have new campers and mentor campers. And we got a lot of support, I should mention, from Three Rivers Park District, who has a whole trailer full of gear, tents, sleeping pads, stoves, etc. But so the hope is that we'll be able to do this same thing in the future, but with families, with BIPOC families. So we'd have new BIPOC families who have never camped before, and we would have BIPOC families who are experienced to be our like camping mentors. Because again, it's a different experience when you're learning from people that look like you. And having grown up in Minnesota, I can say more often than not, I have not learned about, anything in school or in the outdoors from people that have looked like me up until, fairly recently. So, and the other thing I guess that's nice about that too is that we love Wilderness Inquiry. We've had a great partnership with them and hope to continue to have a great partnership with them. And by putting resources back into our own community and our own community members, it'll have a different impact. And it says, we're putting our resources and our dollars into folks that already are here and living in our community. So that's kind of urban family camping. We started doing BIPOC programming July 6, 2020, after George Floyd was killed, and there was just a need to be with folks that look like you and to be in nature and to know that you're safe when you're there. And so for the first part of that, we did probably almost for the first year, it was mostly adult programming because of COVID. And it's like, if we're trying to keep numbers small, if we do it family, then if, 2 families cancel, that's like a third of half of our group size. So we started with adults, which was really cool because, and I can give you an example. We did a put on waders and we're like in Trout Brook, pulling stuff out of the water, looking at it under microscopes. And at the end, we had done a reflection of, what did you learn? How are you feeling? And I remember very distinctly, a woman said, I'm so glad we got to do this without kids because I actually got to do it, right? I got to get my hands dirty. I got to do it. I got to really learn it. And now I can go back into my community and do it with the kids in my neighborhood or the kids in my family. And there's not a lot of adult specific BIPOC programming. And I know we're supposed to be talking about kids, but what's cool about the adult stuff is really that folks get to do it and learn it and feel it and then go back and take it into their communities. So that said, we got some money from y'all for the Equity Matters funding. And so we were able to do some youth and family programming. So we did our BIPOC Family Nature Club, which we've had Family Nature Club type groups in the past, which eventually or even originally just start off as majority like middle class white folks who could take time off to or didn't or had time during the day to like show up with their kids and do outdoor programming. So this time we were like, let's do BIPOC focused. So it's BIPOC led. The woman who did it is a Korean American who just brought a whole wealth of knowledge and her own experience and culture and brought all that with her and put it into what she was leading with these families, which was amazing. We also did Latinx family hiking, which the woman who led that now works for the city. And she, man, I tell you, she had these folks going on some long hikes, you know, like 4 or 5 miles with the little kids. But so that was spoken in, or those hikes were in Spanish. I went to the first one just to drop off some sign-in sheets and just say, hey, you know, good luck. And, you know, the folks that were there started speaking to me in English. And, you know, I was like, yo, like, don't speak to me in English. Like, you know, like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. Like, this is your space. You don't have to adapt, you know, and assimilate to what you have to do so often anyways, right? And so it was a great jumping off point for us this past year. And I guess the last thing I would say is we see the value in this adult BIPOC programming. We also see the value in BIPOC family programming. We've done a handful of family ones that are I wouldn't call them one-offs, but they're not like a whole series. So we did a couple of events last April during the Chauvin trial. It was called Decompressing While BIPOC, and it was down at Hidden Falls. And it was just like a fire and a bunch of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and their kids just hanging out, being in community together, which during that time, if you remember, was just such an intense time for a lot of folks here in our community. And so to be able to gather and feel supported, both the kids and the adults to feel supported and held not only by each other, right, but by the river, by the natural environment, by, you know, springtime and all this stuff starting to pop back into the natural environment. So that's kind of what we've done in terms of BIPOC specific stuff. It's been the best part of my job, hands down. And yeah, we're growing. And I don't know. I haven't seen anything come out about it in the city, but St. Paul, in the last couple of weeks was named one of the top outdoor cities to live in the country, in part because of like the stuff Russ is working on and, you know, with the Highland Bridge too, but also in part because of the BIPOC family programming that we're doing and making the outdoors more accessible for more of our community members. Thank you.
Thanks, Asha. And just building off of Asha's comments and just great stories and work, I wanted to kind of close with this really big additional opportunity that we've all been talking about for a long time as part of the Great River Passage Plan, and that's the Mississippi River Learning Center down in the Crosby Farm Park area. And of course, that's been a legislative priority for the city for a number of years now. But I thought, like, in the context of this conversation and presentation that you've just heard, thinking about this learning center, and we've just now, Parks and Rec in partnership with the Great River Passage Conservancy just went out to RFP for schematic design for the River Learning Center, like really getting into figuring out the design of a building, the building precise location, and program for what's going to happen there. But just thinking about, so that process is really just going to get started, you know, early next year. But just thinking about what's possible in terms of connecting kids and families to the river right here in St. Paul, I know many of us either know people or have had kids ourselves who have gone to like some of the nature-based camps around different parts of the metro or greater Minnesota even. Camp St. Croix comes up a lot, and I get really excited about the possibility of having a lot of those activities and happen right here in St. Paul instead of needing to go, out somewhere well beyond the city limits. And it's if you haven't been down to this area, the Watergate Marina area, it's one of the great spots in the city to connect directly into the river for people to be able to put boats in the river and for kids and families to really have some of their hopefully best and earliest experiences with connecting directly to the city's, the reason for the city's existence where we are, which is the Mississippi. So I just wanted to close with that context around the River Learning Center opportunity, which I don't think we've ever necessarily talked about in this kind of broad way. Like, what is the real potential of this facility? And I think it's super exciting. So we will close there and look forward to taking questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from my colleagues? Well, people maybe collect their thoughts. I just want to thank you, Russ and team, for this update. I say this often, but we, as council members and I think as city leaders, we focus so much on what's wrong and what we need to change and what we need to fix, and we don't spend near enough time really celebrating what's right and what's really impacting our city's residents and our city's future leaders in such a meaningful way. So I just am so glad that we took the time to hear this update, and I hope we can continue to get regular updates. I know I've stumbled upon and intentionally visited some of the events and programs that Asha has had out and around the city, and I liked what you were mentioning about like kind of. I saw a bunch of kids out ice fishing one time on Como Lake, and I wanted to go out and talk to them and find out what they were doing, but I was also like, this is your time and your space. And so I fought the urge to go out and get, poke my nose into it, but just instead like had what's felt really joyful to see that activity on the lake. And I was a camper, camp counselor, up in the Boundary Waters on all the rivers in the city. And I believe deeply in just the power of nature and being engaged in nature. When I get on my bike, I jokingly say I get resting bike face because I just automatically start smiling as I'm pedaling down the road. But I think my favorite part of this presentation was truly looking at the pictures with kids and with adults, and their faces were pure joy. Pure curiosity and empowerment. Like when you are connected to nature, it's really powerful. So I'm really delighted to hear more about this work, and I want to make sure that we continue to make it to fund the work and make it easy for you to continue to grow this important program, and really recognizing that you don't need to go to Wisconsin to enjoy nature. We have a wonderful, wonderful setting here in St. Paul, and I love that we're taking advantage of it. So thank you, Russ and Asha and Mary, for your work on this initiative. And I know there's a huge group, it's a much larger team, but I have half tears in my eyes. It has been such a pleasure to hear this report. I see Ms. Yang has a hand up and Ms. Jalali as well. So let's go to Ms. Yang.
Thank you. It was really heartwarming hearing about all of the work that you all are doing in the community and for our BIPOC community. So I want to say thank you for that. I know for me personally, like being able to go on hikes or even camping, like those are things I was able to do through my elementary school, but it wouldn't have been something that my family that we did on our own initiative just because of the economic barriers that we lived in, and like my parents always on the go, constantly working. And so it wasn't something that they would have been able to make time for even. And so for you all to be creating these opportunities through the city and, for our community, it's really, really meaningful. And it's going to impact the lives of our youth for forever. And I know for sure they're going to carry on like how they felt in the moment, because when I think back to when I was with my school doing these programmings, like it was really special.